Well, once again, the blonde leading the blind. Let's see. I'll find my microphone here. Well, good morning. Oh, my goodness, there are people in the audience. Heidi asked me a minute ago, how do you do that? How do you stand up in front of people without being able to look into the audience and see them? And that's the answer. That's how I do that. Yes. All good questions have the answer built into them. I'm delighted to be here this morning. It's been about 18 months since I've had a conversation with you on a Sunday morning like this. About 6 months ago, I was privileged to be here to celebrate Heidi's ordination. So it's nice to be back. The journey to joy is the topic I've selected this morning. And it's interesting how these topics are developed here at Unity. 18 months ago when I spoke with you, my topic was the 7 deadly sins. Now, that was a topic that had been assigned to be my Duke on Saturday afternoon for a Sunday morning talk. And I told him that the 8th deadly sin was giving me inadequate amount of time to prepare my conversation. But it worked out all right. This time, the invitation was extended without a title for the talk. I encountered Duke here in the lobby a couple of weeks ago. He said, "So what's your title?" I said, "The Journey to Joy." He said, "That's perfect. I can't wait to hear it." And I realized with a shock that I hadn't written it yet. So he did it to me again. Let's see how we can do with it. The Journey to Joy. Let me start with a story. It's the mid-1960s. World War II has come to an end 20 years earlier. And in the 2 decades since the war, America is building to its greatest apogee, going into orbit. The American society is surrounding the cities with suburbs, and the suburbs are populated by baby boomers, and the baby boomers in record numbers are attending public schools. Outside in Overland Park, there's one of those suburban high schools. It's taking care of 2,500 youngsters. I'm privileged to be one of those students. And this school is a giant high school with a huge bridge linking both sides of the school. On one side, the cafeteria, the campus area where the kids would learn to drive. There was still driver's education in those days. The gymnasium, vocational technical courses for auto mechanics and other kinds of craftsmanship that people would learn. And then across this large, expansive bridge, almost as broad as it was wide, would be the connection with the academic wing of the school, 3 stories tall. Kids after lunch would congregate on this place they affectionately labeled the bridge. They would get together with their cliques and their friends and chat about the challenges and the satisfactions of the day. There was this one little girl, not so little actually, a pretty co-ed, blonde hair, blue eyes, chiseled cheeks, wonderfully inviting and welcoming grin. She was just absolutely a picture of beauty, the envy of any cheerleader on the squad. She wasn't a cheerleader, but she was a friend of mine for reasons that are coincidental to my circumstance. Her name was Susie Timmy. Now, Susie, as you would approach her, you would understand that she looked a little differently than what you would expect. The tilt of her head was not a flirt, but instead a little bit of an awkwardness. And her eyes, though deeply blue and magnificent in the way they charmed you, never really looked directly at you, but somewhere off in a distance that no one actually could see but Susie. And her grin never blossomed into a full smile, and the awkwardness that was characteristic of teenagers in any time, at any place, was a little bit exaggerated in Susie. Fact is, politically incorrect as it is today to call it that, the clinical definition of Susie's circumstances in those days was mental retardation. Susie was retarded. Not important, we don't say that anymore today. Today, Susie is developmentally delayed or developmentally impaired. Now, kids in high school can be awfully cruel to kids who are different. Somehow we don't encounter differences with a welcoming attitude. The kids would be tolerant of Susie when in her presence, but behind her back they would call her names. I won't repeat them here. Sometimes they would say to others, "Oh, you're about as bright as Susie," in a way of ignominiously diminishing someone. Kids can be mean at that age. But Susie and I got along. In fact, we got along so well that she would be standing near the cafeteria on that end of the of the bridge, and I would be standing near the academic wing, getting ready to go back to class and wanting to get a head start on getting into the part of the school that I needed to. And Susie would see me, and you would hear a name that would be expressed. It would be my name, but she spelled it a little differently in the way she pronounced it. D-A-V-U-H-D. David, she would scream, and she would start to walk, and then start to sprint, and then go to a full gallop, and the kids standing on the bridge would, like as Moses raised his hand, like the Red Sea would part, partially to give her room, and partially to take their distance from her as she approached me, and like a member of the varsity football team, she would hit me with a body blow. I'd almost fall down, but she would hug me so hard I couldn't. She would be so happy to see me, filled with questions. How are you? How's class? What are you doing? Is your eyesight back yet? Susie, I do not mock, but I express the way she talked because it was an affectionate way of dealing with me. She was always happy, always eager and pleased to see me, always ready to hear more. I never could get information out of her. She had to get information out of me. We'll come back to Susie in a minute. Let's talk for a moment, though, about tolerance. The kids tolerated Susie in front of her, but not in her back. Tolerance, I suggest, is not an end state that is important for us to achieve as we look toward each other and build community. Martin Luther King, who was, of course, alive at the time, Dr. King told us we needed to build a society of tolerance. Because when we tolerate individual differences, those differences will eventually collapse and enable us to weave the threads of a stronger community as virtue of that collapse. But Dr. King was smart enough to know that tolerance is not the end state. It's the beginning of a journey. Have you got tolerance for people that are kind of difficult to get along with? Do you tolerate your boss? Tolerate a co-worker that you're not real fond of? And then go home later in the day and scream at your wife and kick your dog? Huh? Are you really being tolerant if the attitude that you hold in your heart is not as civil as the behavior you're engaging in when you're with those people that you have trouble tolerating? I suggest to you it's important that the attitudes we hold are just as valuable as the behaviors we engage in. Because what do we know about in unity? We know that our behaviors express our beliefs. And our beliefs embrace our attitudes. And any attitude that we hold, even during a moment of tolerance that is poisonous or toxic, is going to be inserted into the universe as negative energy. Carl Jung talked about that. The energy that the brain creates, he said, generates a kind of energy that goes outside the body and enters something called the collective unconsciousness. And the unity principles teach us that that collective unconsciousness is served poorly if toxic energy is injected into the atmosphere of our surroundings, positively if that energy is more loving. So I suggest we have to replace tolerance with something else. We have to replace it with acceptance. And the way we get to acceptance is through an exercise of faith. Now, before we talk about building on this journey to joy, our way through this map to find our way to that destination, let's talk about a cousin of tolerance, whom I call patience. Kids had to be patient with Susie. Susie would talk to them a little longer than they wanted to talk, would carry on topics that would really make kids very vulnerable because she would talk about her feelings and ask others how they felt. I know that I used to be with my mother at times in high school, and I would get impatient with her because she would finish my sentences for me. You ever been with somebody who does that? You're about to say X, and they think you're going to say Y, and they're so impatient with your conversational tone that they finish your sentence for you? I finally got frustrated with my dear mom when I was a teenager, and I said, "Mom, you keep finishing my sentences for me." She said, "No, David, you're starting my sentences for me." We got through that. So sometimes while we're demonstrating behaviors of patience with people, we're really feeling in our heart a great sense of impatience. And we need to replace impatience with what? With enthusiasm. Instead of being patient with you and tolerant of you, I need to exercise enthusiastic acceptance of you. Now, the acceptance part is tough. Because if I accept you are who you are, totally and completely, unconditionally, without judgment, if I accept institutions are what they are, totally and completely, without judgment, if I accept conditions as they are, totally and completely, without judgment, it will at times require an exercise of great faith. Because sometimes the setbacks we encounter in life are difficult to figure out. What's the purpose? What possibly could be the meaning? Why did 162 people die in a tornado in Joplin? How could that possibly be something I can accept enthusiastically? And yet, most of the time in our lives, if we trace history and our personal experience back to those difficult moments or back to those great moments, we can find, because we're thinking, feeling human beings, a sense of purpose and meaning that reinforces the faith we are required to bring to those circumstances when they seem so troublesome, so difficult, so hard to cope with. So enthusiastic acceptance becomes what? It becomes appreciation. On this journey to joy, I need to abandon and give up. I need to become intolerant of tolerance and impatient with patience and exercise faith and exercise also good cheer. How can anybody who exercises good cheer be someone difficult to deal with? And that builds my place to a way of appreciation. Now, how do I appreciate you? What are the disciplines that I engage in to appreciate you on this journey to joy? Well, first, I appreciate you by helping you understand that I want to understand you before you understand me. It's the St. Francis prayer. Seek first to understand and then to be understood. I want to understand who you are and what's important to you so I can appreciate those things that you value. Second, I want to know your feelings. I want to know how you feel. And I want to feel the feelings you feel because I want to demonstrate true empathy. I want to appreciate those challenges that cause life to be tough for you and those satisfactions that cause life to be good for you so that I can empathize, feel your ache, and feel your joy when joy and ache are present in your life. And third, most important of these equals, this must be the leader, I want to be of service. I want to be helpful. I want to know that if you want to come home at night after a hard day at work and a tough challenge on the thoroughfares with the traffic congestion, fighting the traffic, and you need 10 minutes just to unwind and make the transition, I want, without having been asked to appreciate that need. I want to meet that need before I insist on you listening to what happened to me in my day. So appreciation becomes the important place to be on this journey to joy. But how do we get to joy? What do we do to build the bridge to joy? I suggest there are two qualities we need to be considering.